Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video, where today I'm going to be completing the game with the Golem and Electrode lines. Well known for their explosive tendencies, I do think that these two are going to do very well together because they cover a lot of issues that the other one has, with Electric being able to hit the water types that hurt the Golem line, and Golem being able to hit all the ground types that Electrode just really cannot. But anyway, let's go and move on to their stats and move pool, starting with Geodude. It has 40 HP, 80 attack, 100 defense, 30 special attack, 30 special defense, and 20 speed, making its physical stats excellent. However, its special stats and its speed are exceptionally low, which might end up being a bit of a problem. That and its rock ground, so it's 4 times weak to both grass and water. Moving on to its moves, it gets access to a lot of ground, normal, and rock type moves, and through level up it also gets access to moves like Flamethrower and Brick Break, which could come in handy. And now moving on over to Voltorb, who has 40 HP, 30 attack, 50 defense, 55 special attack, 55 special defense, and 100 speed, making it extremely fast, but it does have just an okay special attack at this point. Moving on, and of course it gets access to mostly normal and electric type moves, but it does also get rollout, which could come in handy, as well as light screen, which may be invaluable for the Golem line considering their weaknesses. And of course, between these two, of course they get access to both self-destruct and explosion. So now let's go ahead and move on to our Geodude in particular, which has a careful nature, raising its special defense but lowering its special attack. And with how plentiful grass and water type moves are, I'd say that that's a pretty good nature. It gets access to the Rock Head ability, which prevents all recoil damage from moves like Double Edge, so that could come in handy, and it gets access to Tackle, Defense Curl, and Mud Sport by level 10. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to Voltorb, who has a lax nature, raising its defense but lowering its special defense. And it being an electric type, only being weak to ground, that is kinda nice. It gets access to the Static ability, which has a chance to paralyze foes whenever they make contact with me, and it gets Charge, Tackle, and Screech by level 10. So with that all out of the way, let's go and move on to the run, and at level 11 Geodude gets the move Rock Throw, and then I run into the old man who leads with an Abra and a Horsey. And he might actually be quite difficult for this pairing because I currently don't have an electric type move to deal with the Horsey, and Abra has all 3 of the elemental punches. So I need to be a bit more strategic in this fight. Luckily Abra did get paralyzed on the first turn, so it might not be able to attack the turn I send out Geodude. Because I need it to deal the majority of the damage, because Horsey takes almost nothing from Tackle. Even after a harsh defense drop, I send out Geodude, and luckily it didn't get attacked on that turn. And Horsey decides just to go for a Leer. I'm able to take it down in a single hit with Rock Throw, and then out comes his Shroomish. And then Abra goes for Thunder Punch to finish off Voltorb, and now I have to send out Teddiursa once again. And hopefully Abra doesn't decide to attack me this turn, though in hindsight I do think I probably should have attacked Abra. It does get fully paralyzed, so I go for a Tackle to finish it off, and then all that's left is the Shroomish, which decides not to go for Absorb, and so I'm able to take it down with another Rock Throw. So a fairly easy first attempt. Now moving on to the Power Rangers, and today I decide to fight Red because I have super effective damage against both of his fire types, and Voltorb is able to outspeed and use Screech. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and begin. Just a little bit of rambling. If you are enjoying this video so far, consider liking, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Now, Geodude is another Pokemon I really like the animations of. It's very expressive considering it's just a floating head and some arms, which I'm now realizing might be the same reason I like Magnemite. Or it might just come down to nostalgia playing a lot of Pokemon Stadium when I was younger, but I really like this move in particular. It's very nicely done. Anyway, with that, we defeat Red, and we move inside the Cypher base, where at level 16, Geodude gets the move Magnitude, which is a fairly decent ground-type move, and I teach it over Mud Sport, and at level 15, Voltorb gets the move Sonic Boom. Speaking of Voltorb, I run into another one soon after this. Hello, Voltorb. Goodbye, Voltorb. Anyway, moving on, at level 21, Geodude gets the amazing move Self-Destruct, which I'm going to teach over Defense Curl, and will hopefully not press accidentally during this run. Anyway, now moving on to the battle against Lavrina, she leaves with a Love Disc and a Beautifly, and right away Water Gun takes Geodude down to 3 HP, and luckily Beautifly decides to attack Voltorb instead, and it gets paralyzed. I take down the Love Disc right away, and then out comes Roselia. I go for Sonic Boom into Roselia, which of course does a flat 20 damage, which isn't quite half. Geodude gets finished off, though luckily that Mega Drain didn't really steal too much HP, and Sonic Boom misses. Okay, that's a bit unfortunate. Voltorb gets taken down to 8, another Sonic Boom hits, taking it down to yellow, and it finishes me off with Mega Drain. Okay, not a great first attempt, but luckily there's some things I can do. For one, I can level up Voltorb up to level 21 to get the move Spark, which I teach over Charge, and then I evolve Geodude into Graveler, which is going to be a nice increase to stats. So it has 55 HP, 95 attack, 115 defense, 45 special attack, 45 special defense, and 35 speed, adding a flat 15 to all of its stats, which is fairly decent. Unfortunately, 35 speed is still not fast enough to really outspeed anything on Lavrina's team. However, the extra special defense and attack should help a bit. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to attempt number 2 against Lavrina. I go for Spark into Love Disc, and hopefully that takes it down in a single hit. It unfortunately does not, and Water Gun gets a crit, taking Voltorb down to 30. I went into this battle with the assumption that Love Disc would go down to a single Spark, and then I could deal damage to Roselia, or if it didn't quite KO, I could take it down with Voltorb. Roselia does just decide to go for Leech Seed into Voltorb though, so I'm able to take it down, and then she sends out her final Pokemon, a Shadow Delcatty. Unfortunately, the Leech Seed does get transferred to it, so it is going to be healing every turn and dealing damage to Voltorb. But it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Voltorb goes down, so now no more healing for Delcatty, and it also paralyzed it with Static, so now I'm able to outspeed, go for Tackle to finish it off, and then all that's left is the Beautifly, which I finish off with a single Rock Throw. So with that, we beat Lavrina on the second attempt. Now moving on, and of course you cannot have an explosive Pokemon duo without the obligatory Mirror Bee, and it seems that he's also sporting something explosive on his head, though I'd say it's his style. I snag his Voltorb for the magnet item, raising all electric type damage by 10%, and then at level 29, Graveler gets the move Rollout, which I decide to teach over Tackle. Now moving on to the real game power, and I pick up a couple of my 2 favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect, and right away I'm going to teach Protect to Voltorb. That way Graveler can now freely use its ground type moves without worrying about damaging Voltorb. And so I go ahead and teach Protect right away over Sonic Boom, and while I never teach Hidden Power this run, Golem had Hidden Power Psychic and Electrode had Hidden Power Dragon. Anyway, with that, I run to another Graveler. Hello there, other Graveler. Goodbye, other Graveler. And right after that fight, Voltorb evolves into Electrode, which is going to be a huge improvement for it, because Electrode has 60 HP, 50 attack, 70 defense, 80 special attack, 80 special defense, and 140 speed. So on top of being a little tankier, it also hits quite a bit harder, and it's so fast that there's no way anything is going to outspeed it, at least not without some speed boosts. So now let's go and move on to the battle against Snaddle. He leads with a Lantern and a Quagsire, and on the first turn I go ahead and use Screech into Lantern, and then I go for Rollout into it, dealing over half its health. Water Gun does quite a bit to Graveler though, and with the speed drop from Rock Tomb, Lantern is going to be faster, so I go for Spark. Unfortunately doesn't KO, but it just goes for Water Gun into Electrode, so I'm able to take it down. Then out comes Lunatone, and now with 3 rollouts it should deal quite a bit of damage to it if it didn't just go down to Quagsire. Okay, well that's very unfortunate. Lunatone sets up Shadow Sky, Rock Tomb really doesn't do much and isn't going to change the speed order. I go for another Spark, taking it down to a 3rd. Shadow Wave takes me down to a Sliver, and Quagsire finishes me off with Rock Tomb. So with that, I decide to go ahead and run back to the Real Game Tower to go pick up Light Screen, and I teach that to Electrode over Tackle, and then I go into the battle once again. Right away, I set up Light Screen, that way I won't take nearly as much damage from Water Gun, and then I go for Rollout once again. The Lantern just decides to attack Electrode, and so does Quagsire, and so I'm able to outspeed the Lantern on the following turn, go for Screech, and take it down with a 2nd Rollout. Then out comes the Lunatone once again, but this time I actually have the rollouts ready. Rock Tomb gets a crit, taking my speed down once again, and unfortunately it seems after 2 speed drops I am slower than Lunatone, though it does go down on the following turn. And then out comes Cast Form. Graveler gets hit by a Rock Tomb, which will make it absolutely slower than the Cast Form, so it will be able to get an attack off. I go for Screech into the Quagsire, which unfortunately misses. I take down the Cast Form with Rollout, and then he sends out Matang. Unfortunately, I'm still locked into Rollout, and it's not very effective against Matang, so I'm going to use Screech. That way I can lower its defense, and hopefully it'll go down in a single hit. And unfortunately, a 2nd Screech misses. That is very unfortunate, but Matang goes down to a single Rollout anyway. So with that, all that's left is the Quagsire, and unfortunately, it isn't the easiest thing to take down. Electrode can't hit it whatsoever, so I do need to set up Light Screen this turn. That way Gravel doesn't get taken down immediately by Water Gun, and Graveler's rollout just ended, so it is having to use Magnitude in order to deal damage. I started with Rock Throw because I didn't want to take down Electrode in case Quagsire didn't decide to attack it. And so I can swap over to Magnitude now and take it down with just a couple of those. Now moving on, and at level 37, Graveler gets the move Rock Blast, which is stronger than Rock Throw, but its accuracy is worse. And then at level 40, I decide to evolve our Graveler into Golem. And Golem has 80 HP, 110 attack, 130 defense, 55 special attack, 65 special defense, and 45 speed. So while it does get quite a big boost in its physical stats, its special stats are still pretty bad, and its speed is only 10 points higher, so it's not much faster than it was before, but it is still an upgrade nonetheless. So with that, let's go ahead and move on, and we go straight into the battle against Gonzep. He leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf. Hello, other Electrode. I go for Protect on the first turn with Electrode, and luckily that ends up working out. I don't get flinched. And I go for Earthquake to take down the Electrode and nearly take down the Nuzleaf. Then out comes Vileplume. I set up Light Screen this turn, that way I can't get taken down by Giga Drain, and then I go for Rock Blast, which unfortunately misses. Giga Drain doesn't quite take me down. I go for Spark into Nuzleaf to finish it off, and then he sends out Whiscash, which is the second reason I really needed to raise my special defense. Vileplume is able to survive a Rock Blast and puts Electrode to sleep, which isn't great. And at this point, I decide to just go ahead and roll Magnitude. If it rolls low, which it does not, I could have had Electrode alive for this next part, but unfortunately, it goes down to the Magnitude. I go for Rock Blast, and of course it misses. So unfortunate. A second Rock Blast, and it's actually not doing as much as I thought it would, and Skarmory takes me down. So back in for a second attempt now, and I go for Protect and Magnitude just as I did before. And unfortunately this time Golem actually gets hit by the Fake Out and flinches, so I set up Light Screen the following turn, like I did before, and then go for Rock Blast to take down Electrode, which that crit was very helpful for. And then out comes Vileplume. Nuzleaf hits a feint attack, dealing almost nothing. Go for Screech and another Rock Blast, this time guaranteeing that I'm able to take down the Vileplume. And then he sends out the Whiscash once again, and because I know it's not going to go down to a single Rock Blast either, I decide to go for Screech and Rock Blast once again. And one Rock Blast does about a quarter. A crit takes it down to low yellow, but unfortunately it survives. It does just go for Hyper Beam though, so it's not actually all that much of a threat. Go for Rollout on Whiscash because it's having to recharge this turn. And unfortunately Nuzleaf wasn't able to be taken down by two Sparks. Rollout finishes off the Whiscash, bringing out the Skarmory once again. And because I'm at a turn 3 Rollout, I think that it should be able to take it down in a single hit. Nuzleaf goes down, and Rollout takes it very low, but not quite enough to finish it off. But Spark does the job, and we beat Gonzep on the second attempt. Now moving on, and I decide to pick up Thunderbolt and teach that over Spark to Electrode. And then soon after I get the move Earthquake, which I teach over Magnitude, and then I go into the battle against Gorgon, who leads with a Lairon and a Celio, and on the first turn I go for Thunderbolt into Celio, and then I decide to call Golem, that way I can raise the accuracy of Rock Blast so that it's always going to hit. Thunderbolt of course takes down Celio on a single hit, and then he sends out Slowking. I go for Thunderbolt, which isn't quite enough to take it down, so Rock Blast does the trick, with a crit. And then he sends out Earth Ring. Lairon goes for Earthquake, dealing quite a bit to Electrode, but only a little to Golem. So I decide to go for Protect and Earthquake this turn, which in hindsight maybe wasn't the best idea, but Lairon goes down and Ursaring protected. Then out comes Primeape, his first Shadow Pokemon, and I go for Thunderbolt into it, and then I go for Rock Blast into Ursaring. Thunderbolt isn't quite enough to finish it off, so it is able to hit a Shadow Rush, and I go for Rock Blast, taking down Ursaring, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Hypno. And then I decide to Protect an Earthquake that will take down the Primeape and deal quite a bit of damage to the Hypno. Never mind, it takes it down in a single hit. And with that, we beat Gorgon on the first attempt, and we move on to the final area of the game. And these two are doing incredibly well, so as long as there's no untimely explosions, they should be able to roll out through the rest of the game pretty easily. So with that, we move on to our first battle against Lorena. She leads with Gardevoir and Gorbis, and I go for Thunderbolt into the Gorbis right away to take it down. And then she sends out Roselia. I go for Rock Blast into Gardevoir, which with a crit takes it down in 2 shots, though it would have been a 3-shot anyway. Then out comes her first Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Farfetch, to go for Thunderbolt into it so that it can't set up Shadow Sky or confuse with Shadow Panic. And then she sends out her final Pokemon, a Shadow Altaria, which Rock Blast takes it down to low yellow. Leech Seed is set up on Electrode, though it doesn't really matter too much at this point. Thunderbolt finishes off Altaria, and a Rock Blast takes down Roselia in 2 hits. So with that, we move on, and I run into another Electrode. Hello there, other Electrode. Goodbye, other Electrode. And at level 53, Golem gets the move Explosion, which is just a stronger self-destruct, and then I run into another Golem. Hello there, other Golem. Goodbye, other Golem. And then we get to the top of the volcano, where I run into Snaddle once again. He leads with a Metang and Quagsire this time. I go for Protect and Earthquake right away, which takes down his Metang and takes down his Quagsire. He then sends out Scizor and his first Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Solrock, And right away, I want to take down Soul Rock, that way it doesn't set up Shadow Sky. So I go for Thunderbolt, taking it down to low yellow, and Rock Blast misses. Okay, well that's a bit unfortunate. Silver Wind luckily doesn't get an Omni boost on Scizor, and the Fruity Pebbles rain down. I go for Thunderbolt to finish off the Soul Rock, and then out comes Cast Form. And then I go for Rock Blast into the Scizor, taking it down to half. And at this point, I should be able to take it down with an Earthquake. So after the Fruity Pebbles fall, I go for Protect and Earthquake, which I know for a fact will take down the Cast Form. It does take down Scizor, and that just leaves his final Pokemon, a Shadow Starmie, which is usually quite fast, but compared to Electrode, it doesn't really stand a chance. So going for Thunderbolt, and it takes it down in a single hit, and we beat Snaddle. Moving on to Ardos, and he leads with a Shadow Swallow and Alakazam. And right away I want to set up Light Screen and then attack the Alakazam because it is definitely the stronger Pokemon here. Swallow is usually a big threat, but because I know for a fact I outspeed it and it just sets up Shadow Sky on the first turn, it's not really all that threatening right away. Unfortunately, Rock Blast missed on the first turn, so Alakazam is still alive. I take down Swallow with a Thunderbolt, and I am tempted by the move Explosion once again. But I really shouldn't, so I decide not to. And then he sends out Kingdra. Ice Punch does about a quarter to Golem. I'm able to take down the Alakazam with a Rock Blast though, and then he sends out Heracross. And at this point, I really need to get rid of the Kingdra because it does have Hydro Pump. So I decide to go for Protect and Earthquake, hoping that it'll take it down in a single hit, but unfortunately it survives on just a sliver. Brick Break destroys my Light Screen, and Golem goes down to a Hydro Pump. Kingdra goes down to the Fruity Pebbles, and then he sends out his next Shadow Pokemon, Shadow Electabuzz. And right away, I go ahead and take down the Heracross with a Thunderbolt, bringing out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Snorlax. Electabuzz goes for Shadow Storm, which does a lot more damage now that my Light Screen is gone. And I go for one last Thunderbolt, dealing only a little bit to Snorlax before it takes me down with a Shadow Wind. So with that, a pretty good first attempt. Let's go back in again. I go for Thunderbolt on the first turn instead of sending up Light Screen to take down Swallow. And then Alakazam goes for Ice Punch, which gets a crit, which unfortunately led to that loss. And then on the very next attempt, it happened again. So here we are now on attempt number 4, where finally I don't get hit by a crit Ice Punch, which I'm surprised that it happened twice in a row. And in fact, this time it goes for Psychic into Electrode, which is very strange. And then it does it again. I protect with Electrode and go for Earthquake, taking them both down. And then he sends out the pairing of Heracross and his Shadow Electabuzz once again. And in hindsight, this might be a bit foolish, but I decided to set up the Light Screen because I didn't want Electabuzz using Shadow Storm and dealing a lot of damage. But it just decides to go for Shadow Half anyway. I get a crit on Rock Blast, taking Heracross down in 1 hit, which means I could have taken it down in 2. And then I go for Protect and Earthquake to take down the Electabuzz and start dealing damage to the Snorlax, which it does a ton of damage to. And because it tried to attack the Electrode, I know for a fact I can take it down with not very much issue. Thunderbolt finishes it off, and we beat Ardos on the 4th attempt. Now moving on to Gorgon, he leads with the Slowking and an Ursaring this time, and right away the Ursaring goes for Protect. And I decide to take that turn to make Golem's Rock Blast more accurate. Slowking goes down to a single Thunderbolt, then out comes Aggron. It protects on this turn, so I'm only able to take down Ursaring. Then he sends out Walrein, and I go for Thunderbolt into it, and then I go for Rock Blast into that same position in case it didn't go down. It does. And then out comes his first Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Poliwrath. Rock Blast doesn't really do much damage here. Aggron hits an Iron Tail, dealing a bit of damage to Golem. I go for Thunderbolt to take down the Poliwrath, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Mr. Mime. And I go for Earthquake, which unfortunately does take down my own Electrode, but it takes down Aggron, and it takes down Mr. Mime. Now, with Gorgon defeated, we move on to Eldis. He leads with a Shadow Manectric and Ninjask, and right away I go for Protect and Earthquake to take down the Manectric. Unfortunately, because I am slower than it is able to set up Shadow Sky, but it's taken down by the Earthquake, and then he sends out Shadow Salamence. Now, Salamence is going to be a bit of a threat because the Shadow Sky is active, so hopefully if it decides to attack anyone, it's Golem because it has a much higher defense. But actually, it decides to just go ahead and go for Shadow Hold. Now, strangely, I decide to go for Rollout. In hindsight, I think I should have just gone for Rock Blast here, because it would have done a lot more damage and would have allowed Thunderbolt to take it down. So definitely a misplay on my part, but it is able to finish off Salamence on the following turn. Though Electrode did take quite a bit of damage because of it. Then he sends out Flygon, and unfortunately Electrode really can't do anything against Flygon because it can't hit ground types. And unfortunately my Screeches just keep missing. which is extremely annoying. It's a 90% accurate move, it really shouldn't be missing that often. But anyway, Rollout takes it down, and then he sends out his Shadow Marowak, and while his defense is pretty strong, a full power Rollout is definitely going to break right through him, and then that just leaves his final Pokemon, a Shadow Lapras. Now, luckily Lapras does have to set up the Shadow Sky on the first turn, so it's not a threat right away, and it's looking to be a 2-shot as long as I hit, and it attacks 3 times, though it might be a range, and of course the first Rock Blast misses, so Golem gets taken down extremely low, though not out. There is still a chance of victory here. I go for Rock Blast once again, and it turns out it only needed 2 shots this time. I guess it was a range, and all that's left is the Ninjask. And I go for another Rock Blast, and it hits, taking it down right away. So with that, we beat Eldest on the first attempt, and now moving on to the big box legendary, Shadowlugia. And I go for Thunderbolt and Rock Blast. Thunderbolt takes it down to half, and as long as Rock Blast does a decent amount of damage, it should be able to take it down. It hits once, it hits twice, and it doesn't hit again, though Electrode is faster and finishes it off. So with that, we go into the final battle now against Greevil. He leaves with the Shadow Rhydon and Moltres, and right away I go for Thunderbolt, but unfortunately the Rhydon has Lightning Rod. Go for Rock Blast, and it misses. Electrode goes down to a crit Shadow End, and Golem goes for another Rock Blast. Shadow Fire takes it down to 29, Moltres does go down to Rock Blast just in 2 hits, and then out comes Shadow Executor. And at this point, I would just like to see how much Earthquake actually does to the Executor, to see if it's viable to use to take it down, and it looks to be about a 3-shot, which is certainly usable, but it goes for Shadow Storm, which is a little concerning, so let's go in there for a second attempt. And right away I set up Light Screen this time and Rock Blast because I know Rock Blast will take down Moltres right away. Unfortunately Golem is slower, so there is a bit of damage that I take, but it's not too bad. Then out comes Executor, and Rhydon decides to go for Shadow Hold, which usually means that it's going to try to go for Shadow Panic, which is quite annoying. I go for Protect and Earthquake, which does take down Rhydon and does a bit of damage to Executor. He then sends out Tauros, and that will lower my attack. Luckily, Executor does miss a Shadow End. I go for Rock Blast and Thunderbolt to take down the Tauros right away. Unfortunately, Thunderbolt isn't quite strong enough to do it, and Shadow Sky gets set up, though the Tauros is paralyzed. Rock Blast also did miss. I go for Thunderbolt to finish off the Tauros, and then go for Rock Blast into Articuno, which should hopefully take it down, unless it misses again. Okay, Executor hits a Shadow End. And then I go for Thunderbolt, and please Rock Blast. Just hit once. Articuno gets taken down very low. With Thunderbolt, Rock Blast finally hits, taking it down, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, Zapdos. Unfortunately, Electrode gets hit once again by a crit Shadow End, taking it down in a single hit, leaving just Golem behind, who is unfortunately slower than all these Pokemon, and goes down to Shadow Bolt. However, for his second attempt, that wasn't too bad, and it's no surprise that after only 4 attempts, I'm able to defeat Greevil, so I go for Light Screen just as before, and then go for Rock Blast, which actually hits this time, taking Moltres down right away, and then out comes Executor. Just as before, I'm going to go for Protect and Earthquake, because the Rhydon is once again setting up to use Shadow Panic, so I take it down and deal quite a bit to the Executor. Then out comes Tauros once again, lowering my attack. Now, I know for a fact Thunderbolt isn't quite enough to finish it off, but I decide to go ahead and call Golem this turn because I want to be able to take down the Articuno right away. And so by stalling a turn, now Electrode can finish off the Tauros, and then I can go for Rock Blast, which as long as it hits, should take down the Articuno, hopefully in a single turn. So Rock Blast does hit, and it takes it down in just 2 hits. So with that, he brings out his final Pokemon, Zapdos, and now it's finally time to win this battle, because I have one trick up my sleeve I've been holding onto this entire time. Go for Protect and Explosion, which takes down the Zapdos in a single hit and finishes off Executor. What a perfect end to these 2 explosive Pokemon. So how well did these 2 do together? Well, they beat the game at a time of 8 hours, 45 minutes, and 8 seconds, with Electrode being level 58 and Golem being level 60, with 11 feints throughout the game, 9 of those to bosses, but only 2 of those to random trainers. So let's go ahead and go over the pros and cons of this pairing. I guess we'll start with cons today. Voltorb really has to rely on Geodude in the beginning because it just cannot deal much damage with only Tackle and Sonic Boom, and once it gets Spark, while it is a lot better, it misses a lot of key KOs, and on top of that, it also still can't really hit ground types all that well, especially those paired with the rock typing. And so Geodude does have to pull a lot of the weight, but with that being said, the Golem line is definitely not off the hook because they are both 4 times weak to grass and water. They're also extremely slow, and on top of that, all their best ground type moves are spread moves across the entire field, so they're not very synergistic with Voltorb and Electrode until it gets Protect. With that being said though, their placement in the 8+ tier nearly at the top shows that this pairing is extremely good despite all the flaws they have, and I think it comes down to 2 main things. The first being Electrode and Voltorb's extraordinary speed, making it so they can actually set up Screech and Light Screen effectively, and it is invaluable for Golem because it relies on those extra support moves in order to either survive oncoming attacks or deal enough damage to take things down. And that comes down to the second thing, being that Ground, Rock, and Electric are all extremely good types in this game. Electric is great against many of the bosses, Rock is the best type to use against Greevil, and Ground is just a very solid type throughout the game, and having access to Magnitude so early is very nice for dealing with many threats all at once. So despite the numerous shortcomings of these two individually, together they make a fantastic team. So with that, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!